Welcome to the trenches, everybody.
Hi, Carl.
Yeah, so Kathy will be joining us shortly. I'll rock us through trenches, and then we'll turn it over to you, and we'll get rocking right away. Don't want to run out of time on this one.
Yeah.
So trenches points update. Ooh, it's a nail biter.
Isn't it?
It's getting real, people.
I was calling people to get their points today.
In third place still, but catching up fast, is Team 1, Captain Aaron Asbury. Kathy and Chelsea are really bringing the points home. They don't want to buy root beer floats. Team 3, just behind them, with 326, still doing real well. That's Carl and Billy. Billy didn't turn in his points for this week, so watch out. Team 3 is going to have some additional
We didn't
points
get
coming
Lisa's
in.
on here either, so.
Or Terry's.
Yeah.
And then Team 2, still rocking first place, Amanda, 171 points. Miss Kelly, 131. Abraham disappeared into the world.
I actually called him today to try to get his points, and I got a good old voicemail.
not here. She said she was coming.
Oh,
Kelly?
maybe she'll.
Yeah,
What's
she
she
said she
rolling?
was coming,
Tammy?
but maybe she's still working on it.
I saw her at her cubicle, and I think she was still working. But I got her points.
Anyway, so getting tight, people, and it ends July 3rd. So
Woo!
we'll see you soon.
Crank up the heat, guys.
All right, Miss Chelsea, I would say let's turn it over to you and
Awesome.
explain what all of these boxes mean.
Yes. So we're gonna solve the mystery of the settlement statement today. And first things first is I want to go around the room and ask everybody what questions you frequently have on a settlement statement, or what would you like to get out of this meeting today, so that way I can make sure to address anything that anybody has.
What's the
Carl.
loan type?
This is completely arbitrary. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Go ahead, Carl.
So for me, I know to look for invoices I've turned in and home warranties and commissions, because those are all the numbers I know.
Okay.
I'd like to know what else I should be checking every time,
Okay.
aside from those things.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Terry, did you have any questions that you want me to address?
Probably if I looked at this for a little bit.
Oh, it's completely arbitrary, and don't worry about things that are actually contained in there. We'll
Okay,
complete example.
okay. Yeah, I understand that. I had an incident where I had a closing on the listing of mine, and I called the title person, and they gave me a number
Mm-hmm.
for the closing. So I called my seller and I said, yeah, this is what you're gonna have to bring to closing. He said, okay. You get there and it changed my $500
Wow.
because she said, and it was still within the closing costs that they agreed to pay. But it was such a surprise. My seller was just beside himself with anger.
Bet.
Yeah, because he didn't know ahead of time. It made me look bad,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's all because why she didn't pick up the phone and call me back and say, hey, we added this because he's paying for the insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, for settlement, maybe it has nothing to do with the statement, but what do I do in the future to avoid something like that? Call again at the last minute, or?
So that's super tough. Honestly, it is your closer's responsibility, your closing team's responsibility to make sure that you have the most accurate, up-to-date settlement statement before you come to closing. So if they made a change that affected your seller, and your seller had to come in with money.
Well, they had a check.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had to come in with money.
Well, so sellers coming in with money is something that doesn't happen every day anyway. So if there was something that happened on the settlement statement that made a change to that dollar figure, you should be notified before you come to closing that there was a change on the settlement statement.
Right.
And our teams try very, very hard to make sure that any of those changes take place and get notified before people come to closing for that reason alone.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not something with the settlement statement. The only thing that would come from the settlement statement is if you had the next version to compare it to the first version and see where that came from. That would be the only thing settlement statement relevant that I could see that could help solve that.
Okay.
I wish I had a better answer for that.
I just called twice.
I was covering a closing a while back for somebody else, and the contract said seller to pay X dollars for closing costs.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't say buyer's closing, it just said X dollars for closing costs.
Mm-hmm.
The title company and the loan originator assumed it meant buyer's closing costs. The seller assumed it meant
All.
all of his closing costs. It was about a $1,500 difference.
That is a big difference. And the advice I can say to that is make sure that your contracts are clear and concise.
Well, it seems like somebody else should. I mean, we weren't the only ones looking.
Right, right. And
The title officer was looking at it, and the loan originator was looking at it.
mhm. Well, and I can see where that would come from. And honestly, we aren't supposed to interpret contracts. The contract is there. These are the terms of the contract. That's our guideline and where we pull all these numbers from. So it missing the word buyer would
Well,
be
yeah,
something
the way it
that,
was written, it was left open to interpretation. and
Right.
And the two sides interpreted it differently.
right. And
And
that's
nobody
the
said
one thing
anything.
you want to put on an addendum to make sure that things can't be interpreted differently. You want clear and concise, and that's the best advice I can give. Lisa, did you have any questions before we get started?
I know I've bought and sold quite a few houses in the last few years, and I always have a question. There's always something
Mm-hmm.
that you're like, well, where did this come from? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, yeah, I'll just pick up the phone. Usually they're right. Right? Oh.
Robin.
I'm with Carl, I just want to make sure I'm not missing something.
Okay.
And that's the most intimidating part of like,
It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
And Amanda. Anything you want me to cover specifically?
Just the general, because I'm not gonna lie, when I get these, I'm like,
What? Okay. Wonderful. Hello.
oh.
So what I'm gonna have you do is there's actually two versions of a settlement statement in here, and I'll have you put them side by side really quick. And I want to ask you the question, are they different?
Yes and no.
Yes,
Yeah.
No seller credit for one.
Is there?
for exactly.
Oh, there it is. It's a buyer credit.
All right, so I'm going to tell
Oh,
you,
I see. Yeah.
yes, they're different, but no, they're actually exactly the same.
One's a debit, one's a credit.
Well, so both of them include the $10,000 seller credit. However, one is way more straightforward to look at than the other. So if you pull out this little sheet that has the breakdown on it, I couldn't pull an entire contract, and I apologize, I just kind of made the other stuff up at the top. But if you take a look at that, there is a seller credit of $10,000. So on the one that's more straightforward, the one that was done at 10:21 a.m., you can clearly see under the financial section at the very top that there's a $10,000 seller credit. Now on the other version done at 10:28, there's a seller credit, but you can't see it explicitly because basically every lender does settlements or does closing disclosures differently. Some require that all of the fees that are part of the seller credit actually be put on the seller's side. So that way it's not explicit showing you that $10,000 seller credit. So what we do as a courtesy is we create a breakdown that says seller paid buyer cost. And so that's in here. And that gives you a breakdown of that actual seller cost. And we'll go over that in a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of break the ice with asking you if you thought the answer different.
Yeah, but you say it's on this item, but just out of curiosity, where is it?
The breakdown?
No, the $10,000.
We're going to talk about that in a little while.
You're getting ahead of her.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, she already said that
I
it's
did.
there.
But if you look at it, it is in the
This
loan
is
charges
here.
to mortgage company, if you add them all up.
Oh, okay, it's
It's a part of the
Broken
breakdown. Yep, and we'll go over that
Okay.
more
Okay.
specifically after we kind of run down the line and we do the play-by-play of things to look at immediately. So the best way to look at a settlement statement, to be honest with you, in my opinion, is print it out and make sure you have a copy of your purchase and sale agreement as well as your preliminary title commitment and just kind of lay it all out so you can see it all at once. From my personal experience, I found that that's the best way to be able to do it because if you keep everything kind of all in one stack and you have to flip back and forth, that might be where you miss something. So we're gonna work with the settlement statement that was prepared at 10:21 a.m. That one's a little bit more straightforward. It'll be easier to follow through, and then we'll talk about the other one. So pull out your one-page contract.
We should all be that lucky.
I know.
And actually, when I started
People
with
used
the
to tell me
license
stories
in
about It probably
76,
was.
it was a
Yeah.
one-page contract complete.
Man, those are the
Told me
days.
they'd lay the contract down on a chair next to somebody or other, the broker, and a few days later they'd get a check. And that was all there was to
Now we
it.
started changing.
All right, so we have our settlement statement and we have our little checklist line right here, and then we've got our purchase contract. So first glance, what can you look for right when you first get a settlement statement? You can, commission. That's all it is. Don't worry. That should be first thing on the list for you guys, but I put it all the way at the bottom.
This should be the last.
First things first, we'll kind of take a look at the snapshot, and we can take a look at the recording date. Now, I don't have the recording date on my lovely one-page contract, but humor me and assume that we're recording at the end of the month. So double check that the recording date is the recording date that you guys had set forth in the purchase and sale agreement, or if you're closing ahead of schedule, then just double check that those dates are correct. Then the big ticket items. So we'll take a look at the sales price and make sure that the sales price is $569, because that's what we've got there. And then you'll double check that your buyer's earnest money, if you have the buyer, that the earnest money is correct. And if there's a seller credit, there's that $10,000 seller credit we talked about. So that is a little bit more straightforward on this one. If you were to get a settlement statement that looks like the other one, I would say we can work through that seller credit at the very end after we kind of separate everything out. Invoices. So where you find the invoices would be on the second page in this case under the miscellaneous section. They're usually down at the very bottom, so that's where you can double check if you have all the invoices as a part of your transaction. If there's a home warranty, that would be in there. Any other invoices that you need. As you can see, we have one invoice to Fix It Felix.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Oh, is that Carl's alter ego?
I don't know, is it?
Nah,
It's from
fool.
Wreck-It
It's from
Ralph.
Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah.
Breaking my heart.
Yeah, I tried to have some fun with this at least. As you can tell, we have best buyer ever and your best client as the buyer and the seller on this transaction.
Buyer,
Buyer.
buyer ever. Buyer.
So we'll double check that there's invoices on there, and then of course you want to double check that your commission's on there as well, and that's in the commission section on the second page as well. And then if you have the seller, yep, commission is kind of in the middle on the second page.
Oh, okay, there.
Yep.
Big star by them.
Yeah, most important. And then payoffs. So if you have the seller, you want to double check that their payoff is on there. Now, that's the title company's responsibility to make sure that any deeds of trust that show up on the prelim get paid off, but it's also in your best interest for your client to double check that those are on there as well. So by taking a look at your prelim and knowing what payoffs your seller has, it also is preparing you for later when you're at closing to be able to say, oh yeah, if you had 3 payoffs, all 3 of your payoffs are on there. And it gives them a peace of mind as well that you're paying close attention to the numbers that come across your desk. So that's kind of your first glance. Those are the key items that you can see kind of right off the bat without diving too much further in and having to start thinking a little bit harder. So are there any questions on the first glance items? I just love how there's paper literally all over this because that's exactly what I do. No questions?
We're still reading.
Oh. Did you do the first glance items?
Well, I'm looking for the early occupancy.
We're not to early occupancy yet.
Well, I'm
Stepping
thinking
ahead.
I thought this was the first glance items.
No, first glance items. We got a bullet point.
Oh, well, it doesn't say first glance.
It's right behind that page. That's a little
Oh,
checklist
okay.
for you.
I thought it was this here.
No, that's our contract today. The one-page contract that doesn't specify closing date.
All right.
Can I ask a question? real quick?
Absolutely.
And stop me if I'm jumping ahead.
Okay.
You mentioned first thing to do, grab your purchase and sale agreement, any amendments, and your prelim. What information is on the prelim that I would be comparing to the settlement statements?
So prelim, basically, I put that on there because if you have the seller and there are deeds of trust reflected on the prelim that are getting cleared off or paid off, it's important to be able to see, oh, well, my seller had 3 payoffs, so I need to make sure that there are 3 payoffs on here. Or if they had paid a loan off and a reconveyance needed to be filed, that's more of something that we do as the title company, but it's also good for your knowledge to know exactly what is coming out of your seller's pocket at the closing table, how many payoffs they're actually dealing with, or if they had like a lien or a judgment or something that was getting paid off, you could compare.
Gotcha. And those will be, liens would show up on the settlement statement as well then?
Typically, yes, as long as they haven't been paid for in advance, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, great question. All right, so after our first glance items, then we move into something a little bit trickier. Take a look at the prorations. Now, prorations can get extra tricky when it comes to taxes and homeowners dues. So we'll talk about the trickiness of taxes and homeowners dues in just a second. But as far as items that need to be prorated, what are some items? There's taxes, there's homeowners dues. If you have early occupancy, that could be on there. Are there any other items you can think of that might need to be prorated at closing?
Assessments?
Insurance, maybe? Maybe.
Maybe homeowners association insurance, maybe.
Homeowners dues.
Yep, homeowners dues, assessments, possibly. What about if you have a multifamily property and you need rent prorated?
Mhm.
Investment.
Yep, some things to think about. So it's important to know in your transaction what needs to be prorated. So if you do have an investment property where rents need to be prorated, have you communicated all of that information to your title person so that they have all of the leases and estoppels and know the exact amount?
Chelsea, as far as the seller's payoff of his mortgage is concerned, there many times is not prorations with certain kinds of loans on their interest. Am I right about that, or is it on the principal? Like an FHA loan is no longer prorated?
Right, so you, on an FHA loan, you are required to pay interest for the full month.
What other loans are in that capacity as well?
So it's mainly just FHA loans. If you have like a conventional loan or something like that, the payoff will be good through X date. And so what we do is we pad the payoff by a few days in the event that you weren't able to close on time. Or if you, if maybe we recorded on a Friday, but we had a late recording in the afternoon and the lender wasn't able to credit that to their account on time, that would be something that we would actually have a payoff to a certain day. So that gets a little bit tricky as well. But it's, to my knowledge, it's only FHA loans that require the full
I
month's
think so
interest.
too, but
Possibly VA as well, but I don't know that off the top of my head. Good question. All right, so prorations. So the prorations you see on this settlement statement are prorations between the buyer and the seller. And so the way that I kind of think about it is I put myself in the shoes of one of the parties to say, okay, well, I'm the seller on this transaction, so I'm responsible for property taxes for the time that I've owned it. So for property taxes, I'm responsible from the first of the year all the way up until the recording date. And that kind of helps me get through the logistics of how the prorations need to be. So in this particular scenario for property taxes, first half property taxes have already been paid for this year. So the seller is responsible for the remaining portion. So the seller is responsible for the first half, and just coincidentally, we're recording on the 30th. So it doesn't really come out to much. But if you think about it, we're recording on the 30th, so the seller is only responsible to the 30th. So the buyer takes over possession on the 30th and through the rest of the year. So the buyer's responsible for that one day and then second half. Does that make sense? Okay.
He's
So-
responsible for the 30th or the last half of it?
So he's responsible for the 30th because the buyer takes possession of the property on the date of recording. So for the proration in this sense, we're prorating from the 30th to July 1st, which is a whopping one day. And so you'll see that that's a credit to the seller since they've already paid for first half property taxes. And it's a charge to the buyer because they need to pay for that one day. And then you'll also see that the buyer is paying for second half property taxes upfront as well on the second page under miscellaneous. So that's how taxes can get kind of tricky, especially in tax season when we're getting ready to pay taxes out. There might be scenarios where the title company actually has to hold first half property taxes to make sure that it gets paid by the seller's lender through their reserves. There's all kinds of scenarios that can happen with taxes. So it's really important to be able to potentially put yourself kind of in the shoes of one of the parties and understand how much they need to pay for taxes for the year. That's kind of the best way that I can describe how to check for taxes, if that makes sense.
And the lenders, depending on the time of year, will sometimes want, is it more than 6 months of reserves? Would want more like 9 months of reserves?
So we're required as the title company to pay out anything that comes due within 60 days. So since in this particular scenario, we're closing within 60 days of the time frame that second half property taxes are due, we're actually collecting for second half property taxes directly from the buyer. Now where that can get tricky is if the lender wants to be the one to collect the reserves to pay taxes directly. And so that's where you can kind of cross-reference and see under the impounds section, which starts at the bottom of the first page. And you'll see that the lender is actually only collecting for 2 months of property taxes. So since the lender is only collecting 2 months, we know that they're not going to have enough money in their reserve account to actually pay for second half property taxes.
Impounds?
Yeah, it's just the name that it's called. It's to set up the reserve account.
Oh, okay. Hey, you threw the word out there and I don't see it on there.
Oh, yeah, it's
I
right
see it,
there. Impound.
bottom of page 1 and 2.
It's
Oh, okay, I was
it's the-
looking, I thought you said page 2.
Well, it
Bottom
starts
page
on
one.
page 1 and continues on to page 2.
The other thing that I would think might be a proration would be a special assessment.
Those can be a proration, yes. They don't happen as often, but it is something to, again, if you have special assessments on a file, to note that in your file. So that way, when you do get the settlement statement, you know what you need to look for. So property taxes, we're good there. Early occupancy, you'll see it's $50 a day. I didn't even put a start date on here. I just decided that it was going to be the 23rd. So one thing you can look at, of course, is early occupancy. If you have it, to make sure that that's on there as well.
I'm sorry, where is that? Where's
Under
the-
prorations and adjustments on the first page.
You know, they used to have
Thank you.
numbers on the side of
I
these
know.
settlement statements. What-
It used to be
Drop the
so-
numbers.
Yeah, that's what the forms.
Don't
that's
get
what I
me
was gonna say
started,
earlier.
Kathy.
Okay.
They used to identify what the loan type was too.
Well, they do still, but this is not a good.
I
Version
keep
of
looking
that.
for it. I can't find it on any of these.
If, Chelsea, if it was on here, where would we find it on our?
The loan type.
On our typical
FHA, BA,
settlement?
So I'm actually gonna have to go back and look because with the implication of CFPB and the changes from the settlement statement that some of you know versus this settlement statement, personally, I believe that the other settlement statement, while it was still kind of convoluted, was more straightforward than this one, just because it was a lot easier to find everything. Now, this particular version was adopted because number one, it's on letter size paper, and number two is that it only includes the fees that are associated with the transaction. So the previous settlement statement that we had was legal size paper, and it had a bunch of writing on it, whether or not it actually applied to the transaction. So it was more uniform in the sense that you know exactly where all of the fees are going to be. But this way is more concise, and it's supposed to be more for the consumer. Now, what you see here is a combined settlement statement, but if you were the buyer, you would only see the buyer's portion. So any of the fees that are blank on the buyer's side would actually not show up on a buyer's settlement statement.
And the protocol, and I'm still a little fuzzy on this, so many times we get a combined statement so we can make sure that the seller is paying what he said he would pay, et cetera, but we're really technically not supposed to send the combined to our client.
Oh,
So we only send the buyer portion, and the seller portion. And some title people will split that up for you, and some won't. So, but I think protocol says we don't send the whole thing to the one or the other client because some of it's potentially confidential.
Yeah, so basically the buyers to only see the buyer's side and the sellers only to see the seller's side. So what we do as a courtesy for you guys is to send you the entire settlement statement. So that way you can take a look at your purchase contract and your commission letters and everything and cross-reference and make sure that everything is on there. When it first got implemented, we were still in the trial and error phase of it, and we would actually only send your side. So if you were only representing the buyer, we would only send you the buyer's side. Now the problem with that is you can't see if your commission's on there because the seller is the one that's paying for it.
And you also can't see if a contractor is going to get paid that the seller agreed to pay if you represent the buyer. And the fear you have if you represent the buyer, you don't want the contractor to put a lien on the property after closing in the event he didn't get paid. So that's a particular instance. I at least called title and said, is this amount of money on the seller side? And the answer was yes. I never saw it there, but I was told it was there.
Yeah, so that's why we send both sides out now to you guys as a courtesy to make sure that you're double checking that anything that you feel should be on there. And if you do ever need just one single side for your customer or client, just ask. And it's super easy for us to be able to generate one and send it to you for you to be able to forward to your client directly.
Well, they do send both sides to the broker.
Yes.
And when I do the final review, I upload that to Sky's phone for and it's in there with your documents. You can look at it anytime. But that's not until after close.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a little late.
The horse is already gone. But
You're
you can close the barn door now.
So after closing, can you then send that to your client, or is that still
There's no
confidential?
reason to come,
Okay,
unless you're going to court, and that might be useful then, but there would be no reason to.
okay.
They don't
But-
need to know what the payoff was, that the seller's loan amount was. It would serve no purpose.
Gotcha.
But you have an opportunity to double check everything.
Fair to say.
All right, so back to these pesky prorations. We'll take a look at the homeowner's dues, and that's another thing that can potentially be tricky, depending whether or not what type of homeowners association dues you have. Are they monthly? Are they quarterly? Are they annually? Are they semi-annually? That's all stuff that could potentially be a question. So you want to make sure that those homeowners dues are being prorated accordingly. Now, my easy example, they were just monthly dues, so it just makes it easier that way. But definitely take into consideration what type of dues this particular homeowners association has, so that way you can make sure that it's prorated accordingly. For example, if they were annual dues, you want to make sure that if your seller did pay for those dues, that the buyer's reimbursing for their portion for the entire year. Now, for this particular example, it's monthly dues. The seller's already paid for the month of June. So we are actually just prorating the 1 day because the buyer takes possession at the end of the month on the 30th. And then with homeowners dues, it also gets a little tricky because we're collecting for homeowners association dues from the buyer for the month of July, because their first payment is actually going to be in August. So what we like to do is make sure that the homeowners association payment is due the first time their mortgage payment is due. And that's not necessarily customary. There are some places that may or may not do that, but I know that Alyeska Title, kind of as a rule of thumb, we try and make it so that their first homeowners association payment will be due around the same time that their first mortgage payment is due. So that way there's no confusion there. But like I said, we are to pay things that are due within the first 60 days from recording. So that's why we would pay for the next month's dues as well. Another kind of tricky HOA thing would be a dues deposit. So does your seller have a dues deposit on file? If so, how much is it? Is that dues deposit still the same amount that's required by the homeowners association? In this particular scenario, it's not enough, I believe. Yeah, so we did the debit credit for the portion that the seller had on file, which was $125. But the homeowners association actually requires a $250 deposit now. So we actually had to collect an additional $125 from the buyer to make sure that the whole amount of $250 was collected. So other little tricky things that can just kind of be there.
Did you leave the seller's portion? Did you leave the seller's initial deposit in there and then reimburse them separately?
So what happens when there's a situation like that is that the money stays on file with the homeowners association. So all we basically do is just a debit credit for that portion. So under the proration adjustment section, you'll see a credit to the seller of $125 and then a debit to the buyer of $125. And then to collect the additional portion that's in the miscellaneous section on the second page. So a bunch of little tricky things. And it's really hard to know what to look for unless you kind of know the ins and outs of what's going on in your transaction. So if you ever have a settlement statement that you maybe want guidance looking through, I'd be more than happy to kind of help you navigate. If you wanted to go over the settlement statement with me, that's not a problem.
Chelsea, how long do you think it takes on average for a closer to get efficient and good at this? And you have to have a good mathematical mind, I think, as well.
Well, lucky for you guys, I actually have a degree in math, but no, it takes closers a little while. And honestly, we have some people that are being groomed to be escrow officers. It's a process. And it takes practice and it takes a lot of people's review. So I remember when I was first starting, I would work something up and I'd probably have like 2 or 3 people look at it before I even sent it back to the lender for their review. Because when the lender will look at it, they'll make their changes, they'll send it back to us, we'll have to make changes. It's a whole big process. It's a lot longer than a lot of people think. And every lender does it differently. That's why I provided you with 2 different copies of the settlement statements. But it's different for everybody. And I wish I could say, oh yeah, if you work on a settlement statement, if you've been doing settlement statements for 30 days, you'll be fine. But honestly, every transaction is so different and there's so much to look for that it is something that you get better at with time.
There's a checklist that you go by or something? Look for this, look for that, look for the other.
Pretty much, yeah. Everybody kind of has their own rhythm with how they prepare these. Honestly, we don't actually prepare just the settlement statement. What we actually do is we balance with the closing disclosure with the lender, and then this is kind of generated also with the closing disclosure. But we don't issue closing disclosures, that's why you never see one from us. You'll only ever see a seller closing disclosure, which is almost identical to the seller settlement statement.
Could I ask a question? Okay. I had a closing recently with Justin at Jeff Eagle River office. I'm going to tell you it was the fastest, smoothest closing I've had in 32 years.
Really?
He did it in 30 minutes. I've never had a closing that fast, that smooth. I mean, whereas I had made sure that the people got this before, 24 hours ahead of time. Of course, he had it because it was supposed to close sooner than later, and all the paperwork was ready, and we just had to wait. So I always go over this with my people. So I only came because Missy came there and asked me to come and be a good reviewer. She said, you always add such nice things. She's so full of compliments. So I said, swell my little head again, I'll come here. But anyway, that's one of the things that I thought because I know these backwards and forwards because I've been doing them for 32 years. And I've always gone to every closing. I have never missed a closing because one of the things you want is you start that offer, you finish it with this. And that's the way I believe, that's why I get so many, all my business is referral right now. I'm 100% referral. This year, last year was 7. So I really just thank you for, explaining this so well, because if you are the expert with these people on their money, on the biggest thing that they invest in, they're going to come back to you because they said, wow, it was so smooth. She understood everything. She helped us to understand. So I really appreciate you teaching this. Because I haven't seen one of these, because the title companies do one, but it's scattered. And I did not like, First American did one years ago when I went to it. This is much nicer.
Thank you. I will say, Justin and I go way back. By way back, I mean we were both assistants in the escrow department at the same time. And we both kind of graduated and progressed through Alyeska Title at the same time too. So it means a lot to hear that he's doing a wonderful job. And I know he is, but I love hearing good reviews because you only ever hear bad stuff.
Well, yeah, because most of them take an hour and sometimes longer. But Justin just was able to just move these people along, and it was so smooth, seamless. I thought, oh my gosh, everybody needs to be like Justin.
Oh, good. Well, I will pass the good word along. I appreciate that very much.
I told him I appreciated that money. I said it's very smooth, very easy closing because, it was a Wasilla property, which is a little different.
They are
because of their taxes different. I mean, there's so many things, unless you do business out in the valley, you need to understand how their tax prorations work.
Absolutely. And then adding in, there's all kinds of different things that can happen. It can be a new construction property and you'll have to deal with things that come along with new construction. And so there's a bunch of stuff like that. So, absolutely.
So we take this, which you gave,
Yes.
and use this as a guideline.
Yes.
We're going to pretty much be okay, and that'll bring up any questions, pick up on what you got.
I think so. I think I did a pretty good job with kind of lining out the big ticket items at first glance, double checking your prorations, extra double check your tricky stuff like taxes and homeowners dues. And then last but certainly not least is turning to page 2 of your contract. And that's this lovely little spread that you guys do for us. And we appreciate it very much because this is what we go by when we're splitting the fees out. So with this,
I often see them blank in contracts.
I know.
just cringe.
Ooh, on where?
well,
I'll see that page just blank.
yeah, no, that makes me cringe too. Don't worry. Just like when I see owner financing and none of the
Because they want to
terms
negotiate everything at the closing
Yeah.
table, I guess.
Really? Well, yeah, but he's right though, because
It's true.
the last deal I got was from another realtor. I just recently got it last week. We are moving forward on it, but she had left all the dates blank
Yeah.
to be determined,
Uh-huh.
everything to be determined. And you know what? My counter was, we need date, or this deal's
Yeah,
not up.
well, yeah.
And even though it was contingent, I put a date for closing. I said, we're closing, recording this, I don't care. Otherwise, the deal's dead.
I had one come blank on one of my listings, and I think I had a 2-page counter. I identified everything in those check boxes. Who's going to pay it?
Okay, so there's lots of little things that
Lots of little
you guys
things.
have to catch too.
Yeah,
as a title
absolutely.
company.
So just to give you an idea of my thought process when we're preparing these is we get a closing disclosure from the lender. That has all of their fees on it. So what we do is we take that and we input all of that into our system. And then we go through any and all invoices that come through, as well as payoffs and anything like that that needs to be paid off. And so we have to match with the lender. We've got to add all that stuff in there. So if you don't have your invoices or your commission letter into your title company, super important that you do that. So that way everything matches. Because then we have to go back and forth and balance with the lender. And so there's a big, long process that happens before you guys even actually get to take a look at the settlement statement. So it's super important to get your invoices and commission letters and everything like that in. So last but certainly not least is that item number 5. So we turn to this lovely spread, and now we need to double check the splits of these fees. So what I'd recommend to you when you're going through your settlement statement, if you do all your first glance items, maybe take your pen and just kind of mark the things that you've already taken a look at. So that way it's a little bit less overwhelming when you go through and you're double checking your splits, because you can see that you've probably already gone over half the settlement statement already. So then you can just go column by column and double check the fees as they come down. So if you're moving through your settlement statement, we talked about the sales price of the property. We talked about the earnest money, loan amount, just double check the loan amounts, right? Going down, we have the seller credit of $10,000. We've talked about each of the prorations already, and then we get into the loan charges. So these are the things that come over directly from the lender. And it's actually harder for me to read this right side up. So we've got.
Never sees them right side up.
I don't. It's true. When I go over this with people, I always read it upside down, so it's really hard for me to read right side up. So we've got the loan discount points. So we'll
Yeah,
double check.
magazine's that way too.
Yeah. We'll double check that the loan discount points on our purchase contract are to be paid by the buyer. So we double checked that there. Credit report, make sure that that's in the buyer's column as well. Document preparation fee, we'll see that's half and half. That's the lender doc prep fee. And yes, sure enough, we have 2 X's on our lovely little spreadsheet here. And then we'll double check flood certification fee, which is a seller cost. And yes, that's on the seller side. We've got the loan origination fee. Yes, that's on the buyer side. Prepaid interest. I'm assuming that's on the buyer side as well, I hope. And then, sorry.
I found you, never mind.
And then we've got tax service fee. That's also known as the tax registration fee. That's on the seller side. Moving down, we've got appraisal. Appraisal is on the seller side. Yes. Now, actually, on this one little thing, I took this one little section off of a contract on purpose because somebody had actually wrote in appraisal reinspection on this second page here, which is not typically there. In the purchase and sale agreement, the first appraisal reinspection is actually the buyer's responsibility under the appraisal section. But in this particular contract, they noted that the seller was to pay for the reinspection. So you'll see that the
Is
seller
that,
paid
that's
for
one of
the
those lines
reinspection.
that are normally blank in here?
Yeah, I believe so.
And they did a nice job of putting it in.
And they
there.
just
It's the
typed
same-
it in there.
Well, it's the same text font and everything.
Yeah, it's
Just kinda
pretty darn close.
Slipped it in there.
Yeah, it's super sneaky. So, but yeah, so that typically isn't in there. It's typically a buyer cost. If you read through your purchase and sale agreement, the first inspection is the buyer's cost.
Appraisal?
First, yep,
Appraisal
the first
reinspection.
appraisal reinspection. So if your appraisal came back,
The seller always paid for the appraisal,
seller pays for the appraisal,
right?
but if there's a reinspection,
Okay.
it's actually
repairs, if there were repairs, that's
Yeah.
why.
Yeah, if they didn't do all the repairs.
for the
they
first
gotta-
one. And then if there's another one after that, the seller pays for it. It's very complicated.
Well, that's good to know, because I got one of
Oh, you do?
those. Today, in fact, the appraiser was supposed to go back up there. Nobody told me that the buyer is supposed to pay for that.
Yep, double check your purchase and sale agreement, but under the appraisal section, I believe it's the very last section under the appraisal section on a purchase contract. It says the buyer's to pay for the first reinspection. Okay, well, hopefully I got rid of a surprise for you.
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay, good.
I'm still admiring the choice of fonts.
Is that what MLS would have put in there? Because you can add in those blank ones. in
Yeah,
MLS.
but I think it's kind of being a little on the sneaky side to match it up that close.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, no, this was one that actually, this is a spread that was pretty much used on a purchase and sale agreement. There were some blank ones, but I actually went and put X's on the ones before I
Yeah,
made
but,
copies for
yeah,
you.
there's one, just over to the right from that, there's another line there that's completely blank. and that's the way it normally is.
Mhm.
All right.
And then you'll see under, I don't know why they had this typed in on there, the first column, there's AHFC/PUR 101. That's
Oh,
not
that's,
typically on
oh,
there
that,
either.
yeah, that's not,
That would only be if they were doing
in
Alaska
the first
housing,
column,
Right.
and then you'd
two-thirds of
need
the way
that.
down.
But they didn't check anything
Alaska
there.
Housing Finance Purchase PUR 101.
Mhm.
That's not normally in the checkboxes.
So I'm writing check for filled in blanks.
Yes, Great.
Watch for sneaky stuff.
watch for
yeah.
sneaky stuff in your contract.
So
Yeah, especially when you first get the offer, always go through
Mhm.
this section right here with a fine tooth comb.
Well, then if you go through that section with a fine tooth comb at the beginning, it'll be kind of like a memory refresher when you do it at the end too.
So if you did get one of these, and let's say they had forgot to check a box or something like that, for instance, the recording fee, that was left blank. So typically that would be split, but you would have to get verification on that, or do you go with what's typical?
So technically speaking, if it's blank and it's a lender requirement, the buyer's to pay for it.
Okay.
Per the purchase and sale agreement. It says buyer to pay for any fees due to requirements of lender not covered below.
Nice.
So that's why it's extra super important to make sure you put those X's on everything that applies.
Because otherwise you could potentially farm your buyer.
Yeah, because if some, but there are also scenarios, like if, for example, it's a VA loan and the buyer can't pay for certain items, then it's a seller responsibility and we're obligated to put it on the
I'm
seller's
noticing
claim.
there's a couple of X's here that look like they were put in after the fact.
Yeah, I
Oh,
did
yeah,
that
she
before.
did.
I think.
Also title insurance and.
Yeah, that
also-
wasn't checked. So make
Once I
sure that
start-
you check your
Once I
boxes.
start looking at it, I started.
I know, but immediately you didn't notice right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm glad you didn't
Because
mess
Chelsea
with
is
all the
sneaky.
water quality stuff.
Yeah.
That's a.
If you hold
that's
it up to
another
the
class.
light, you can see Ben Franklin too. No, I'm kidding. All right.
So I just somewhat related to this.
Mhm.
I filled these out just based on what the typical splits were, and admittedly wasn't quite clear on what a PUA water test was. So I was like, yeah, I'm representing the buyer. The seller can pay for that. That's fine.
It's expensive. The buyer should be countering on that.
Oh, they countered.
Yeah.
The seller kicked back, and the only place was mentioned on split. So kudos to that realtor who's like, so do you guys really need a PUA test? Because that's expensive. And I go, hang on, I'm going to ask Kathy a question real quick. I'll be back. But I mean, so just as a way of saying, definitely do check those boxes because I almost cost these guys.
Like Kate keeps talking
Yeah.
about specific types of as-built. I don't remember what they were titled. But there are certain types of as-built. If you just ask for an as-built, you get one thing.
There's an Alta survey.
Alta survey. that
Alta
was-
surveys are
It's
expensive.
really
It's
expensive.
it's like a next level water test for the COSA, and it's expensive as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's around $1,000, isn't it, $1,200?
The
Iowa?
one we were looking at in the valley, they quoted it would be around like 600 to 800.
Oh,
But I think in
Anything
town
in
might
the
be
valley,
more.
you can just put off because all you really need is the DEC from the the COSA's not required. And I got that offer from this young lady. I mean, she wrote this offer like she was in Anchorage.
that's not
property's out there.
necessarily quite true.
Because I,
And COSA is required by
No,
the
no, I know,
municipality.
closer, yeah, I'm not talking about closer, I'm talking about for the valley. I had one, I was reviewing for somebody the other day, and they, gave insist we put plats in there on vacant land. Well, they had something else in there, so I helped them find the plat. And I noticed on the plat, it was a fairly recent one, it said right in the notes to the plat, any water systems put in had to meet DEC.
Yeah.
That kind of puts you in the boat of having to get the DEC paperwork.
That's what I said. You have to have DEC
No,
out there.
No, you don't. Not
Well,
by- not-
everything I've sold has had
Gabe wants
DEC.
them in there, especially the water quality test.
Yes, yes.
But it's not a requirement of the borough, but in this case, it's in the notes to the plat.
Well, for your own safety, I'm gonna charge you right offers. You make sure it's a DEC engineer. The engineer tests the water and the septic.
so is the DCE more or less strict than the COSA generally?
It's less.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's $1,700 for the whole thing. For a well septic and then a well and septic, that's what they charge. Right now, that's where their standards
What
are.
is your just plain Jane COSA's cost?
The COSA here is $500.
But then there's the stuff you gotta do with it.
You gotta do
like
it, because it stands for
pumping it,
a
the
certificate of
water flow,
on-site
and-
septic.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure the water quality is better than theirs. I mean, because they have standards for arsenic out there, because I know I was on a community well in the valley. And when they changed it, and made it so much more stricter, they had to do new wells and stuff like that
Yeah.
where I lived.
But there's stuff associated with the coastal, like the water flow, the well
Yeah.
pumping, or the septic pumping. You might have to get an as-built. As-bilt's part of the coastal too.
Yeah, but they're not really required out in the valley. So many things, like I said, I told somebody today, when I started selling in the valley in 1994, there was no FHA or VA because none of the builders did what they call early start letters. You know what the nightmare is? The nightmare is if you're trying to get Alaska housing, I had to find houses and find out how much their electric and the heating bills were. It was pretty wild. So that's why out in the valley, PUR 101s and 102. So I always tell people, just go with a reputable builder like Jess Hall or somebody, and then you don't have to worry about it, because he follows the guidelines almost for Anchorage.
And the one thing I will say about as-built surveys, that's another tricky thing in your purchase and sale agreement. Reason why is because it says as-built survey to be provided with a date on or after blah, or as required by lender.
It doesn't work. What does that mean?
Well, what that means, just for me as a title company perspective, if your lender is requiring an extended title insurance policy, which they do, we actually require an as-built survey. So if there isn't an as-built survey on file, but the lender is requiring an extended policy, one will be required. So in a roundabout kind of way, yes, your lender does require one. They may say, oh no, we don't need one, but if they want extended coverage, then yes, we actually do have
Well,
that.
it drives me nuts when people put in a date and mark it as required.
Yeah.
Okay, what does it mean if the lender doesn't require one? Because that's usually their first issue. Well, the lender didn't require one. Well, you've got a
Well,
date
you have a
there, too.
date there. Yeah, exactly.
So for a question off that,
Mhm.
so that example happens and there is an as-built on file, but it's 10 years old.
That's okay.
From the lender's perspective, it may not meet the contract.
Right.
Sure, yeah,
Right.
if it's as required by lender and there is
And there
on
is
file,
one, yes,
But
you're
if he's
fine.
got a
But if
date
there
in there
isn't
too-
one.
And I will not, unless I did, but I want to do both.
So I know we're quickly approaching the end here, but we'll run through the last couple things on this settlement statement. So impounds are the reserves. That's a buyer requirement. You'll see all of those items on the buyer side there. On the title charges and escrow settlement, you'll see the lender's title insurance, which is the Alta. That's the buyer's side. We've got the owner's title insurance. That's on the seller's side. We have the attorney doc prep fee, which is 100% on the seller's side. We've got the e-recording fee, which we kind of lump into the recording fee is split 50-50. So we've got $5 on each side there. And then our escrow fee or settlement fee is split 50-50 as well. That's the escrow closing fee. We already double checked commission. Recording fees again are split 50-50. We've got the payoff to money man loans for the seller. That was funny.
I can just picture you typing this.
I
out.
know, I
Well,
had no
what
idea.
happens if nobody wants to pay the e-recording fee?
Well, you have
Then
to,
you have to go down to the recorder's office?
no, we're not going to the
Just
recorder's
as I
office.
turned out.
If you want your file to record on time,
Pay the e-recording.
pay the recording fee. Before I was just lumped into the recording fee on our previous settlement statement, so you probably just never even realized it was there. It was just a part of the recording fee, but now we're obligated to split absolutely everything out. And then running through miscellaneous, we already talked about invoices a little bit. Some of the things in here you want to just double check. Home warranty, yes, that's a seller cost. Homeowners Association transfer fee, that's a seller cost. We've already talked about that invoice. We talked a little bit about homeowners association dues and the dues deposit. We've got the survey till we look at houses on paper. No, that one made me laugh too. That one's on the seller side. And then homeowners insurance, that's the buyer's premium for the first year. So they pay for a year at closing, and then we're collecting second half property taxes as well. So that's this one. If you want, I'd be more than happy to explain the other one to you. It's exactly identical to this one. However,
Rearranged.
a little bit rearranged. So the seller credit of $10,000, you can look at the breakdown. These are all of the fees that would have been on the buyer's side, but they've been allocated and moved over to the seller's side. So the way that I recommend, if you have a contract or a settlement statement like this, go through all of the steps that we kind of talked about already, and then look at the seller credit last, because it's going to make the most sense to you.
Thank
My-
you.
Yeah, of
Thank you.
course.
Thank you.
There's a lot of information.
It's a lot, but it's great. Your handouts are
They
awesome.
should know.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Vivian.
Thank you, Vivian.
And Jim.
And Jen.